25 minutes to let Maddie do her presentation, and then that's our weekend. So we all can see like the PowerPoint slides.
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, so we left off on Monday talking about selective benefits for those who participate in interest groups. And I said like the benefits could be informational, you learn new things, material, you could receive discounts, you could receive little perks, coupons, like the weird, what's it called? Like those return label addresses, especially like if you participate in Shriners or donate to St. Jude. Solidarity, like hooray, I'm a part of an organization, or propulsive, I am furthering this goal that I find to be very important. And so with these 4 types of benefits, this is an example of the institution principle in action, as I stated before. And so there are times where people are not satisfied with the selective benefits. Like the free coupons, discounts to Golden Corral will not be enough to encourage people to become a leader. So the people that do decide to take the L, well, I don't consider it an L. I guess it depends on the type of interest group in question that a person wants to become involved in. But regardless, these people who join the exec boards, who oftentimes comprise the leadership, are known as political entrepreneurs, and they accrue benefits in return for doing the work of organizing. These entrepreneurs are a complement to the selective benefits in overcoming collective action problems. So these political entrepreneurs, 9 times out of 10, there's a reason why a person wants to be the president of the NAACP or be the president of AARP. 9 times out of 10, they have desires to eventually run for office or become involved in higher level politics, so higher level administrative, higher level bureaucratic operations. Yeah. And so how do interest groups influence policies? So they do so via insider strategies and outsider strategies. So insider strategies include directly influencing decision makers, as well as pursuing advocacy through the courts. So by directly influencing decision makers, interest groups can create informational packets concerning an issue or concerning a certain branch of whatever they're interested in. And these informational packets can be delivered to congressmen, because ultimately the elected officials as well as their staffers, there are only so many hours in the day and so many man work hours, not man work hours, so much time they can devote to doing research. And so frankly, it's impossible for congressmen to get to know as much information as possible about any given issue. Likewise, it's damn near impossible for their staffers to do so as well. Interest groups fill that informational gap by providing the information. Now, of course, that information can be biased to benefit the interest group in question providing said information, but it's better than no information. And so, of course, then the advocacy through the courts, those, of course, are those amicus curiae briefs we talked about during the court section. Outside of strategies, you can educate the public, and then you can campaign and contribute to candidates. And so, of course, I showed you 2 ads that were from the 2016 election, but I have plenty more. And of course, we saw a couple of ads from the current presidential election cycle, the Priorities USA ad, as well as wasn't there like a Biden, not a Biden, I think we watched a lot of ads from this primary season. So you see how they actually how interest groups campaign for or against candidates or certain issues, not issues, initiatives. And then ultimately, many interest groups employ a mix of both insider and outsider strategies. And so let's talk about direct lobbying. So what is lobbying? When you think of lobbying, you may think of, like the weird seedy guy walking around the Capitol building with nice little manila envelopes, like those little report card envelopes, and it has like $100 bills on the inside. You're like, wow. So that kind of lobbying is illegal. It's mad illegal. But there are different ways that interest groups can go about influencing the policy process via persuasion. And so, of course, yes, lobbying still is very, very, very expensive, but it does make a difference if they provide information and they make sure that group concerns are heard. And so, of course, lobbyists seek to influence other parts of the government. There are regulations on lobbying. Groups must report spending on lobbying. There are strict limits on the gifts from lobbyists. And then finally, lobbyists must register with the Secretary of the Senate as well as the Clerk of the House of Representatives. And so let's see, the most money that the limit on gifts from lobbyists, it's $50. So even if I was like a House representative and I wanted like a new game, like if I wanted like that brand new Final Fantasy VII game that I did not pre-order, but I did and I received it, I could not even like rely on a lobbyist to gift that to me because I think the game is like $65. So like that sucks. Very limited on what a lobbyist can gift an elected official. And so the second way, this is also the insider option, using the courts. Of course, the interest groups influence policy through the courts by bringing suits directly on behalf of their group, financing suits brought by others, and as I stated before, filing amicus curiae briefs. Brown v. Board is actually an example of a case brought by groups, in particular the NAACP, to advance a policy agenda. Thurgood Marshall, of course, the Supreme Court Justice, and then the attorney arguing the case for Brown v. Board was actually the NAACP's legal defense attorney, top legal defense attorney for the NAACP. So, like, that demonstrates actually a great historical example of how interest groups use the courts to influence policy change. And so we can also, not we, interest groups can also mobilize public opinion. They do so by going public. And all the act of going public is it's similar to like what presidents do. They talk, to the public one-on-one on the stage. It's just the act of launching a media campaign to build popular support. This includes advertising campaigns, protests, lobbying efforts, grassroots lobbying efforts, town halls, and building lists of supporters, and then, of course, urging them to pressure officials. It's just like you see, click here if you want to learn more, or we find this to be problematic. The micro targeting that we see, especially for online interest groups, it's like those weird random ads you'll see before a YouTube video. If you're on the Facebook, like I don't know if it's the same thing for Twitter. Well, actually, yeah, you can still see micro targeting on Twitter, but on Instagram or Snapchat, you don't see it. But Facebook, Twitter, you'll see these weird, no, they're not weird, these small ads that are promoted by various groups that have these certain buzzwords based on, of course, on your internet activity. They predict whether or not you'll be likely to respond to that ad. But anyways, these are all methods in which interest groups try to identify and mobilize people to act on their behalf, to pressure elected officials. And then, of course, you can do electoral politics, PACs and super PACs. PACs are just private, PAC stands for Political Action Committee, and they're just private groups that raise and distribute funds for use in campaign elections. PACs give money to candidates and the political parties. Back in 2014, PACs contributed over 470 million. In 2016, PACs contributed, it was almost $1 billion. We're at the $1 billion mark now in terms of PACs and super PACs. Super PACs, on the other end, they're different. So, like, they're super. No. The ways that they work is that they don't have to report the amount of money they raise and spend, and they don't have to report whether or not they're working or airing ads in coordination with PACs or super PACs. So they exist in their own separate nebulas and are actually not as subject to campaign finance laws like PACs and parties are. And so in 2012, if you learn more about like the Citizens United case, which essentially determined corporations are people too, and that they have every right to participate in the campaign season by endorsing candidates, airing ads, etc. Yeah, I'm trying to remember where I was going with that whole point. Super PACs are bad. PACs are bad too, but they make such great ads. But that's just an example of interest group influence. And then, of course, independent expenditures, that's what they do. They spend money on voter education. They also spend money on ads and promos, but they do not have to coordinate with a campaign. And it's not as limited. Well, not as limited. It clearly says unlimited. Yep, yep, yep. And so there's also activism and the initiative, campaign activism. It just refers to groups participating in electoral politics other than making contributions to the candidates. They can engage in mobilization efforts, particularly unions, the Pullman Porters, the Teamsters, and one other. I can't think of the other union that was like historically involved with the Democratic Party and encouraging their members to vote. But that's an example. Gosh, I really can't remember the leader of the Teamsters during the 60s. In that film that's on Netflix called The Irishman, that starred all those old actors. They showed the person that was over the Teamsters, and it was alleged that because of his influence with the Teamsters Union and how the Teamsters Union was like integral to a lot of the election of Democratic House members and Senate members during the 60s. He was considered to be like the third most powerful man behind JFK and another man. It was really wild. But that also shows like the power interest groups can have, especially back in the 60s. So what about initiatives? So groups can also sponsor initiatives, and all these initiatives are just things that come up on the ballot. They survive. Well, it varies from state to state how you can get an initiative to appear on a ballot, whether it's through petitions or endorsement policies. Anyways, once something gets on the ballot, the general public can decide whether or not they are for or against it. Initiatives are sometimes used to overcome legislative opposition. So I'm thinking about the current ballot initiative that's on the Georgia ballot. There's a move, yeah. The initiative is to have Georgia opt out of daylight savings time. So, like, that's fun. I don't know who started the process, but I do know it went through the initiative process. I'm curious. I don't think it'll pass though, but that's an example. I don't think that one was probably funded or spurred by a interest group. Maybe it was. I'll have to do my research. Anyways, are interest groups effective? Eh. Some research has found that advocacy rarely yields returns. Other research has found that the small amount of money corporations spend on advocacy is a sign that it's not worth much to them. There has been work that's shown. I have a colleague, now he works for Disney, but when he was in grad school, he demonstrated that corporations, when they do campaign and fund money, they usually give money to the incumbent. And so while the research that others may find seems mixed, he argues that the funding and work that interest groups do for incumbents actually increases the incumbency advantage. And so the difference that we see here, or like the mixed results, is just they're not the lens and the scope of what they're examining is not wide enough, and is not also considering the way that it could be lumped under other phenomenon. So clearly, I mean, to an extent, it does work, because if the advocacy did not work, people wouldn't be spending close to $1 billion on it. And so that is the end of parties and interest groups. We still got like 6 minutes left. Let's go into where we're supposed to be, public policy, the public policy section, our last section. Oh my gosh, we're at the end, y'all. Thought this day would never come, but we're here. All right. Last section, Lowy et al., chapters 15, 16, and 17, and they are due on a day if you're doing the reading quizzes. I think they just do at the, yeah, they're due on the 27th. Due on the 27th. Y'all can see these slides, right? Yeah, okay. Last days, we're in our last days. On the last day of class, we got Elizabeth and Ellie and Luke doing their presentations. Inequality of political influence in America, as well as cutting defense spending. Email me and we'll schedule a time to talk about your presentations. Cool. Let's talk about that final exam. So it'll be 150 questions, multiple choice. So it's all multiple choice this time around. The exam will go live on Blackboard on the 30th. You'll have between the 30th and May 2nd to complete the exam. However, when you start the exam, that's when your time starts. So you have until your window or 11:59, whichever comes first. So, and of course, it's open book because, we're all home, use your notes, review previous reading quizzes, etc. It's not going to be that bad. And then, of course, even though it's 150 multiple choice questions, there's also extra credit, but the extra credit are just like random riddles and whatnot. You'll see. So let's start talking about economic policy and social policy. Let me change my extra notes. I would not recommend working on two separate computers at the same time. It's always difficult. That's why I went on and ordered another monitor with my stimulus check. Anyways, okay, back. So public policy in the Great Recession. And so the Great Recession 10, 11 years ago, my God, it was a dark time. Gas was like $6 a gallon. There was nothing to do. Homes were being foreclosed. People were losing their jobs. It was dark. And it was during this time we saw the importance of collective action as well as the role of the government. The government action, especially within the economy and within the social sphere, are highlighted in a crisis. We're seeing like the role of the importance of government action right now, even in this coronavirus situation. We saw like the weird protesting that's happening downtown and in Michigan because people are not happy with the government's response to this, not response, treatment of this crisis. And so, what this leads us into our definition of public policy. And all that is just a rule, law, statute, or edict that expresses the government's goals, and it oftentimes incorporates rewards and punishment to promote their attainment. And so let's first focus on economic policy. There are public goods as well as externalities. And all externalities, not externalities, public goods they're just a good that may be that may be enjoyed by anyone if it's provided and may not be denied to anyone. And so examples of these include infrastructure, education, and security, sidewalks, no potholes in the road. Once these things are given to the public, they cannot be taken away. Meanwhile, externalities, they're just side effects of an activity. They affect other parties who did not agree to the activity in question. And so going back to the public goods, they could be categorized as public or private. One can imagine physical infrastructure like roads, bridges, canals, and highways. They could, in theory, be given or promoted in the free market. Let's see. However, throughout most of American history, these functions have been assumed by the governments. The educational policy further illuminates this point. Since the 19th century, education in America has been thought of as a public good. However, private schools also provide the same function. And even though the military and local police forces are thought as public goods, the increasing use of private contractors in the military, as well as the growth in private security, reveals that there is actually a thin line between whether a good is clearly public or it's actually private. And so, gosh, I'm missing a slide. Uh, One moment. I think there's a whole slide that is missing. Is it visible? All right. Missed a whole slide, y'all. It was like showing up on my notes, but not on the actual presentation. Anyways, conditions required for providing for a market economy. So you got to establish law and order. You got to have rules of property and its exchange. You have to enforce contracts. You got to set market standards. You got to provide these goods and deal with and alleviating externalities. You have to have a labor force, and you have to promote competition. These things are necessary. Otherwise, the market economy won't exist, and we'll just live in anarchy. So let's see. All economists concede that there's a critical role in the government for providing the necessary conditions for a free and stable marketplace. Law and order, confidence in property rights, and certainty in contract enforcement are all critical prerequisites for a market economy. Some of these conditions the government can help set are self-evident, others may be less clear. So it's going to be somewhat difficult to go about making sure that the rules of property and exchange are established and maintained. Promoting competition, that's also difficult. We'll see. Actually, no, you can actually even watch like not MSNBC, but what's the business one? CBC, no, CNBC, that's the business one, or Fox Business, whichever you pick your poison, Bloomberg, whatever, Cheddar News, you'll see that it's really difficult for the government to promote and maintain competition here in America, or even in the global sphere. So let's talk about creating a labor force, monopolies, and competition. I think this is where we'll stop, so that way I can turn it over to Maddie and she can tell us about religion, partisan religion stuff. So governments have an interest in maximizing the productivity of the labor force. A monopoly is more than just a game produced by Hasbro and Milton Brothers. Monopoly is referred to a single firm that provides all the goods and services of a particular market. It also refers to the absence of competition. So I think an example of a growing monopoly, pretty sure, Amazon. Amazon, if the COVID virus continues the way that it's going, dollars of donuts, Amazon will be a complete and total monopoly. That'll be the only place you can go online and order food, order groceries, order stuff. And Jeff Bezos is the billionaire devil. Anyways, that's an example of a monopoly. However, maintenance of free markets require reasonably easy entry as well as the ability to compete. And so, I said I will stop here.